a biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
I'm speaking now with Michelle Pearse. She's the CEO of the Australian Christian Lobby. Really don't need to do much introduction for Michelle. But before we get into the nitty-gritty with you, Michelle, can I just personally, on behalf of all of our listeners, thank you and your team for your leadership in our nation. The world, and including Australia, is it's in chaos. Like, I look around and I just think, what is going on? And so I truly believe that you are an Esther. I really believe that, raised up for such a time as this. So, yeah, before I get into it, I just want to thank you for stepping up in obedience to God's call, because it's not an easy call that you've taken on. But I know that an awful lot of Australians have actually already voted, so let's get into it. But next Saturday is the D-Day. So even though a lot of people will have already voted, we've still got next Saturday coming. So I want you to talk to us about what are the dominant political messages that Christians really should consider as we vote, because we hear from the politicians what their political messages are, but what are the dominant political messages that we as Christians should be considering?
Oh, thank you, Wendy, for having me on again. And I love being interviewed by you. As listeners may know, you were our National Director of Politics for a long time and have had a significant part to play in the influence in our nation for all sorts of those big issues. So, yes, in terms of politically, we're hearing a lot of messages coming from both major leaders about cost of living and energy and housing. All the debates, they've stuck very close to their talking points. I think people are getting a little bit tired of hearing it. But I think they're saying those things because that's how people will vote. They'll vote on these issues. They've done the polling that shows that this is what the majority of Australians are concerned about. But I've personally just been reading through the book of Jeremiah at the moment, and the time where the Jewish people were taken into exile into Babylon, and what Jeremiah said to the people at that time, which was the word of God, which was that they should seek the good of the land that they are in. So as Christians, we need to not be just concerned about what's going to benefit us as individuals, but really what's going to benefit the nation. So even when we're looking at all of these sorts of cost of living relief measures, our consideration needs to be, is that really for the benefit of our nation? It might benefit us right now, but really, can we afford it as a nation? What's it going to mean for future generations? But the economic issues in our nation is just one factor. There's actually a much greater threat that we as Christians need to be considering, and that's the threat to our values as a nation, and really the threats to our freedom, the value of freedom. And that's not just religious freedom. It's freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of belief. Australia is obligated to adhere to these human rights through our international treaties. But we have, the Australian Human Rights Commission, who's supposed to uphold these and keep the government accountable, but they're simply not, because they're ideologically captured. And so we're seeing freedom of expression and freedom of speech being hindered through vilification laws that call, not only the Christian stance on transgenderism, but women's rights groups, and those that simply don't agree that people should be able to change their gender and then have rights that match this change of gender. We saw the misinformation bill pushed at a federal level. Thank God it didn't pass. But still, these type of laws are being passed at state levels, and people like Jasmine Sussex, who simply said online, men can't breastfeed. Lyle Shelton, the former managing director of ACL, he said drag queens are dangerous models for children.
Which seems self-evident, doesn't it?
Exactly. I think the majority of reasonable Australians would agree with them, but they're being taken to court because of state-based laws. And so, we're also seeing threats to freedom of conscientious protection. So as much as, probably many in the public won't agree with us on abortion, they agree with our right to object to practicing something that we don't agree with. But in New South Wales, there's a Greens bill that's pushing for the New South Wales Health Minister to be able to order hospitals to perform abortions. abortions. And the reality is there's just not enough doctors and midwives willing to perform abortions, particularly at that late term stage. They didn't get into, obstetrics or midwifery to help people to kill babies.
No.
They got in there into that profession to help women to deliver. The problem is there's just not enough doctors willing. So what can we do? What the Greens are thinking, what can we do to enable more abortions to be performed? And that will mean a threat to conscientious protection. We're seeing a bill in Victoria that may threaten conscientious protection over things like euthanasia. We know that many of psychiatrists have stopped practicing because they don't agree with the gender affirmation model. So there's this big threat to freedom of belief, which is our conscientious protections. We're seeing a threat to freedom of religion through conversion therapy laws that make it difficult for churches to teach a biblical sexual Christian ethic, to pastorally care for those that are struggling with their sexuality, and laws that even silence conversations between friends and family about gender and sexuality. So this is a federal issue because we need the federal government to provide protections to these values and to these freedoms that are being eroded. We should be able to just rely on the Constitution, or we should be able to rely on our obligations, our international obligations to these human rights. But obviously it's not enough, because states and territories and even the federal government have passed freedom limiting legislation. And so we asked the parties that question: will you protect freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and religious freedom? And certainly some minor parties like Family First and the Libertarians, the Australian Christian Party and Trumpet of Patriots are for freedom.
Yeah.
And they want laws that protect these freedoms. The coalition have indicated that they're committed to protecting those freedoms, but haven't really given any positive indications of what that will be. And the Labor government said in principle, yes, they support freedom, but what we've seen is that the majority of these freedom-limiting laws that have been passed have been Labor governments. And so that doesn't say much for where the Labor government stands on actually protecting freedom. That's on our website. We've actually asked the parties the questions, and people can view their answers on the Australia Votes website.
Yeah. I was marching in one of the March for Lives here in Brisbane on the weekend, and one of the signs that people were holding was that life is the major issue for this coming. And I had people saying, well, it's not really because it's a state issue. I was like, no, it actually is a federal issue, because pro-life, like Medicare actually pays for the abortions, and Medicare is a federal issue. So this is a federal issue. And I also find that, Christians don't understand the whole voting system either with minor parties. You can vote number one for one of those minor parties that you've discussed just now. One of the minor parties who does stand up for our values, you can vote number one, and still your vote will count towards a major party if that minor party doesn't get in. I find that a bit frustrating that people don't really understand that. But, we also, on the ACL website, you do help people understand what's at stake, the party positions and the candidates. But I think sometimes too, people look at that and they think, what if I vote that way and my candidate doesn't get in? They feel discouraged, and people are disillusioned with politics. Should they remain disillusioned? Why do we encourage people to stay in this fight?
Yeah, you're exactly right about the preferential voting. Voting for a minor party, even if they don't get elected, the full value of your vote will then go to your second candidate. But still, if a minor party receives a certain quota of votes, then they get some funding, which would then help them for their future campaigning. So for those that want to vote for a minor party but think it's not worth it, well, our message to you is it certainly is worth it, putting them one, because the second preference, and then if even the second preference doesn't get your full doesn't get elected, your full vote then goes to your third preference. So your order really does matter. And we've got a video on our AusVotes website that actually explains that. So I encourage you to watch it and share it so that other people understand the power of their vote and how to vote. Yeah, so I mean, it's likely, especially in the House of Reps, that the minor party candidate that you vote for won't be elected. It might even be likely that the party that you want to win won't win. And so but the message remains the same. I think ever since Jeremiah spoke to the Jewish people in captivity, that our stance as Christians is to seek the good of the nation. And so whoever your candidate ends up being, that we need to pray for them. We need to build relationship with them. We need to believe that nobody is a lost cause. Even if, somebody's elected that you think is quite anti-Christian, they're still not a lost cause. Go and visit them. Ask your pastor if you can invite them to your church for one of your special services. There is so much opportunity we have to actually reach out to our candidates and build relationship with them. This is a democracy, so they want to hear from you. And so, we shouldn't be disillusioned that this is a long game, and no matter who wins government, we know, Jesus is still King of all the nations, and that whatever battle we might not win, in terms of our values during the next 3 years, we know that internally that we've still won a great battle. We have peace, we have joy, and we have freedom within, and nobody can take that away from us. And so just having that posture of seeking the good of the nation, no matter who's elected, and continuing to pray for them and being an example for God's goodness in this nation.
Because we have that hope in our heart, don't we? Last night, my husband Peter preached in an inner city suburb. So as we were coming home, we drove through the city. One of the most beautiful buildings in our city at the moment is the casino. The lighting and everything, you just look at it and you think, wow, that's so beautiful. But it actually hides such a darkness. And to me, it just feels so weird that this very beautiful building that they've built is full of broken dreams, broken hearts, broken lives. Is gambling an issue for this election?
It certainly is. And I think it's one that might fly under the radar, but it is so serious because Australia has the highest per capita spend on online gambling in the world. It's a major problem. In 2024, the total turnover was $244 billion.
No way.
And when my policy researcher told me that, I thought it must be a mistake, but it's true. And this is fueled, there's $238 million spent on gambling advertising, and that was in the 22 to 23 year. So, there are currently a lot of regulations. The government has tried to do some things to regulate gambling because they've seen it as a big problem. There was a major inquiry in 22-23 called the Murphy Inquiry that recommended a complete ban on gambling advertising because of the social issues that arise from the addiction. There's suicides, domestic violence, marriage breakdown, poverty and crime. I have great respect for Tim Costello, who's been a leading advocate on this issue and leads a coalition of those against gambling. And he's shown that. Well, he's just last week he said that research shows that 20% of suicides in Australia, 20% of suicides are gambling related. So urgent action needs to be taken. Even teenagers are getting hooked, even though we have age verification. A report came out last year saying that 600,000 Australian children are gambling around $18 million annually. This is kids under the age of 18. And so it's a major issue. Online gambling is just continuing to increase. Gambling losses cost individuals $31 billion annually. And so this is an issue we have on our AusVotes website as well. We've asked all the parties what will they do about gambling. The Labor government has failed to act on the Murphy report recommendations, despite this being a big issue in their term of government. The Coalition have said that they'll ban ban gambling advertising for an hour before, during and after sports programs. It's something, but it doesn't go far enough.
Yeah.
But the minor parties, again, have certainly come out with much better stances on this. Even the Greens have a strong anti-gambling policy. The Teals have a strong anti-gambling policy. Certainly don't have great policies on other issues. But Family First have come out really strong. They think we should adopt all of the Murphy inquiry recommendations. Trumpet of Patriots as well have strong policies on the need to ban all gambling advertising. So this is a major social issue that all Christians should be reading the party responses and voting according to, who are those that are going to take strong stances against gambling. But not only gambling, all of the other issues. We've also got information on foreign aid, on education, on puberty blockers being used on children, on the influence of DEI, on the workplace, on Indigenous issues. And we've rated each party according to what we believe is the strength of their position. So it's a great resource, and I do encourage Christians to have a look at it.
Yeah, we'll repeat that before we finish up, but certainly where your candidates stand on some of these issues too really speaks to the personality of the candidates, and not just the candidates but the party. So where the party stands on these really speaks to what they truly believe about the family. We talk about the family in terms of housing and economics, and that's all really important. But if we've got that number of people committing suicide because of gambling, then they're not taking a stand on that, then really where does their family's sort of values stand? The last week of election always has some surprises, and I think one of the surprises that I've felt over the weekend, and particularly after last night's debate that we've been hearing about today, is, like, for one thing, the price of eggs. I think that's pretty funny because my husband Peter would have no idea about what the price of eggs was. But that's one thing. But the other thing has been the welcome to country. That seems to have risen its head, particularly in light of the Anzac Day. Like, it just seems to be a thing. So do you have any comment for us on what's happening there?
Yeah, I mean, I was quite disheartened that the coalition seemed to not want to engage in any cultural issues before the election. They've certainly given strong indications on our website that they're very concerned about ideology and education and on protecting women's sports from transgender. So I thought that they would be, more willing publicly to take strong stands on these things. But finally, in the last week, they've come out with a stance that they just think that welcome to country is being performed too much. And polling since that, just in the last week, shows that generally in Australia, yes, people think that it's either it shouldn't be done or it's done too much. And, I think adults can sit and listen, and they put up with it, and they apply their own critical judgment as to whether to accept or reject, what's being said in the welcome to countries. But I think what we should be concerned about is the effect that it's having on kids, because kids are sitting in, in school assemblies and in different meetings and hearing it. And children shouldn't be made to feel guilty about living in a nation where they feel like they have to apologise for something or acknowledge that the land that they own will never really be theirs. And, there is a great movement in this nation among the Indigenous communities of forgiveness and reconciliation. And I know that, Wendy, when you were at ACL, you were a huge advocate of moving in this direction of forgiveness and reconciliation and making that the focus instead of sorry, because sorry within it, carries this kind of guilt that you never get over. But to have the Indigenous communities for forgiveness and reconciliation provides a much more positive future than any kind of guilt narrative will. So I know with my children, I certainly, reinforce to them that yes, we have an Indigenous history and we value our Indigenous people, and we learn about their culture. But for the future of our nation, we are one people, and that's what message really resonated in the Voice referendum.
Yeah. Michelle, you're always across so much. There's a huge amount that we've covered even just this morning, but I know there's so much more. So if people want to know more, acl.org.au is the website for ACL, but you do have a special election website. Can you just tell us that again, please, Michelle?
Yep, that's right. So please go on to australiavotes.org.au and make the most of the resource. We've put a lot of effort into putting it all there in an easily digestible format. And so you can go and compare the party positions. You can put in your postcard code and look up, the candidates within your electorate. For those that we know are pro-life or we know that they're church-going Christians, we've put that within their candidate responses, like an ACL section on their candidate response. We have voting records on there, so you can see how candidates in your electorate have voted if they are the sitting member. So it is a fantastic resource. Use it, share it around, because that will help you to vote with wisdom, to be a good steward of your vote for the coming election.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.